Okay, good. So good afternoon to you all. Very happy to be here. I think we're still having the speakers from the previous session on the screen, but you'll believe us that we're trying to discuss a different topic. The topic of this session is all about startups, disruption, and how that sort of sense the power of startups to change the world, basically, but more specifically, I think, to change the issues that we're facing in terms of our society today. Recently, I heard a very interesting professor from Harvard, and she was saying something that I think I adopted ever since. She was saying that the world now faces three mega crises. The first one, not necessarily in the order of importance, is climate change, which was discussed, I think, in a previous panel. The second one is inequality. So it's kind of more social. And I think today it somehow turned out that all three speakers, which have fascinating stories and experience to share, are dealing more with, I would say, social issues rather than environmental issues. But we'll get back to that. And the third crisis is that of loss of trust, and especially the fact that institutions, governments, global organizations are kind of losing the trust that they've enjoyed for years before, and therefore it's very difficult to move forward because I think, again, as was discussed in previous panels today, there are things that it seems that a lot of people feel that should be done, but somehow they're not getting done, especially on the political level, either national politics or even more complicated on global politics. And the fact is that we kind of losing trust in the ability of those institutions to sort of make the right decisions. So if we'll take those three mega crises, climate change, inequality, and loss of trust in institution, it will lead us forward to the question that we would like to discuss in this panel. Does innovation, entrepreneurship, disruption can sort of maybe change the way that we believe things should be done according to, and maybe present a new and different way that will help us overcome the three challenges, and maybe even more specifically, the third challenge of always sort of expecting the political level to somehow make the right decision in the way that we know at the moment that those decisions are being made. So anyway, that's kind of a quick opening up. I think that what we'd like to do in this session is have it as sort of energetic and interactive as possible. So hopefully we'll do 2 rounds with the speakers, so everybody will have their time instead of just 20 minutes per each. And I really encourage you all to get involved, ask questions, raise comments. I think none of us at the panel here comes from a corporation. We work with corporations, but still I'm not a corporate guy per se, so if there's any representatives here from corporations who work with startups, who expect startups to disrupt the way that they're working, please feel free to join and raise comments and issues and everything. So before I maybe start with our first panelist, I come from Israel. I run a CSR organization, and we're currently writing a report about innovation for good. And we looked into the Israeli case of innovation. Some of you might know that Israel has a good reputation in terms of innovation and startups. And we found out, and it's kind of an interesting story, going back more than 50 years ago, 70 years ago, the first prime minister of the state of Israel was kind of saying, we have an issue. We don't have water, but we do have the sea. Can we do something to sort of meet between the asset and the challenge and turn seawater into drinking, fresh water? And he formed a state-owned company all about desalination. They eventually, it took them quite a lot of time, but eventually they did manage to develop desalination solutions that are very effective. At the moment, I think it has solved Israel's water problem. And it kind of showed that necessity could be, I would say, the mother of innovation. If there's an urgent need, there's a desire to kind of change things, the current way of doing things isn't solving the situation as it is, let's turn into innovation. At that time, it was technological innovation. I think nowadays, and that's moving to our panel, we see also a lot of social innovation. So let's start with that. Gili, who sits in the middle, Gili SWARY, is with a hub, an innovation, a social innovation hub, also in Israel. And the interesting thing, maybe to present the hub with, is the fact that it is sponsored by Israel's social security. So the social security in Israel pays for entrepreneurs to come forward with sort of ideas and solutions to urgent social issues in Israel. So Gili, why don't we start with what is social innovation and why is it sort of booming around the world?
Can you hear me? Great. So, bonjour à tout le monde, je m'appelle Gili. Mon français n'est pas parfait.
Hello everyone, my French is not perfect, so I'm going to be speaking in English.
I'm going to speak about social entrepreneurship. Now, we talk really fast in the entrepreneurial world, so I think I'll just start with a 60 seconds of intro just to make sure we're all aligned with the terms. So, presentation is not on, so I'll just start. So, social entrepreneurs are individuals with innovative solutions to some of the most pressing social issues such as welfare, education, environment, human rights. Social enterprises can be structured as for-profit or not-for-profit organization, delivering goods and or services, oftentimes relying on technology. And social entrepreneurship, the social entrepreneurship field and the whole ecosystem around it really have grown rapidly over the last decade, and today they are a key player in the creation of social change. Now, a lot of times when I'm trying to explain to people what social entrepreneurship or social innovation is, I like to use this GIF. So the accelerated rate of technological changes affect all aspects of our life and make uncertainty an integral part of it. Now, it's basically too much change in too short period of time. Now, along with all the advantages technology has brought, social challenges in this reality also grow in number and in scope. So let's take, for instance, the rise in life expectancy, which obviously at its base is a good thing, but it created a whole new layer of elderly people living in poverty, a whole new vulnerable population, and also think of communication. We can communicate in an incredible way today. I just texted my brother in Thailand before I went on the stage, but along with that, think of all the teenagers across the world that suffered from cyberbullying, for example, which is simply a phenomena that did not exist 15 years ago, and today we already know how severe its consequences are. So social challenges are overflowing. In the GIF, these are the midgets that are running forward, and at the other side, there are the organizations that traditionally solved these challenges that are advancing in their own pace. And then, as you can see, the math doesn't work anymore. There's a need for a paradigm shift, and this is where social entrepreneurship comes in. We need to have solutions that know to run in the same pace of the social challenges, and within uncertainty conditions, create models for solutions that are innovative and sustainable, which is a huge challenge that is at the base of social entrepreneurship. Now, this is a more structured definition than my GIF by the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship. So social entrepreneurship is a term that captures a unique approach to economic and social problems that cuts across sectors and disciplines grounded in certain values and processes. Now, in the past decade, the ecosystem around social entrepreneurs have grown rapidly, from co-working spaces to hubs specifically for social entrepreneurs, to hackathon for social challenges, where participants co-design innovative solutions to social challenges, accelerators that are meant to bring social enterprises to market as fast as possible, and of course the impact investing arena that brings investors, governments, and corporations to fund social enterprises in their initial steps to help them fulfill their positive impact. Now, why do I call it a social entrepreneurship revolution? This is just a glimpse of what's been happening in the world in the past few years. So in the EU, 1 out of 4 enterprises that are set up is a social enterprise. In Australia, there are estimated 20,000 social enterprises. In reality, there are much more. In Canada, 57% of social enterprises are less than 3 years old. In India, more than 89% of social enterprises are less than 10 years old. In the Middle East, 75% of universities are already teaching social entrepreneurship. In the United States, 89% of social enterprises were created since 2006. In the UK, there are more than 70,000 social enterprises. And in Senegal, 18% of population are pursuing social entrepreneurial activity. This is huge. This shows that social entrepreneurship is no longer this small thing that's happening somewhere far away. It's everywhere. And I have to say, I think we live in a pretty exciting era where individuals can really tackle some of society's most pressing issues, and they are acknowledged and they are supported. And I think we have a great example of that here today in this panel.
Excellent. So we have some sort of openings into what social innovation is. We'll come back to you, Gili, with some examples. But Delphine, you run a startup, right? It's still a startup, or is it already, how do you define it, as a startup or as a company?
Hi, I'm Delphine. My English is not so good, so I will speak in French. I'm waiting for you, Momo. Yeah, it's a startup. Stirrup is a startup today. And I'm a social entrepreneur. Stirrup fait partie des...
We are part of one of the 4 companies in the world, which is a company with a social objective, and Stirrup is the business company. I've forgotten to show my slides. I always present Stirrup as a startup business with a social impact. It is important because for me the fact that it is a business startup ensures the sustainability of the social impact. So for the anecdote, Stirrup started 2 years ago on a migrant camp in the Lille, center of Lille, and started with a solidarity soup. I started because I was a volunteer on that camp. I met a asylum seekers family living under a tent with a pregnant mother. I am a mother as well, so it was just out of the question that this baby was born in the street. And Stirrup started there because I found them a vacant an apartment that was vacant for 3 years, and now Stirrup is capturing private owners' apartments and change them into springboard type of apartments for the homeless. So how it started 2 years ago. The vacant housing is an enormous problem that you have in all countries in the world, including in France. We have 3 million vacant, like 20 million in the States, a lot in Israel as well. And this vacant costs a lot because you have tagging and degradation, defacing. And there's only 150,000 homeless, according to French statistics, which is getting worse and worse. And now the calls to emergency services is 6 out of 10 remain without solution. So Stirrup, our purpose is to find a solution, a temporary solution, a springboard, if you wish, for people who are in a precarious situation, to help them in social inclusion. And the innovation we are a platform that puts into relation the vacant owners of vacant flats, housing, and manage the contractual solution. There are two innovations. The first one is to use available resource, use this vacant housing to valorize them, optimize them, and the true purpose is to recycle them, to put them on the renting market. And the second innovation is to have put a legal instrument to lend them, which is a contract of lending a vacant housing, allowing owners, landlords, and real estate professionals, so they lend these housing for free for 6 months to people who are in a great precarious situations via association, because it's only one instrument in social inclusion, in social support that is done by associations, community organizations towards a sustainable housing. Here we go. So today, Stirrup is a startup with the project started through the Alliance network a year and a half ago, through with some the Roubaix city workshops where I could professionalize this project and find the business model behind it. And today, Stirrup is a startup that was created a year ago and which has managed to put people, give shelter to people. It's the 7th springboard type of, we have people suffering from violence, precarious workers who sleep in halls. We have younger people. And the whole purpose is to have a trust relationship with the associations like ABEJ or Sauvegarde du Nord, for example, here, and to ensure from beginning to end that everyone works in the same direction. It's always been easy because it's innovative for everyone, for landlords, but also for associations. So the result is this, just good news. We can see me a lot on the pictures from now on. The process that they don't need me to hand over the keys, so I will not be on the pictures. So that was what I wanted to say about what Stirrup does today.
Excellent, and thank you also for the translation. There was a good introduction. We'll come back to you for further information. You told me, I think, when we discussed it earlier, that you feel that Stirrup is kind of an Airbnb of the homeless kind of.
Exactly.
But we'll go. Yeah.
Okay. Je ne voulais pas le dire, le mot Airbnb.
I didn't want to mention Airbnb, but that's it. I tried to avoid it. That's the point. The idea is that Stirrup becomes a kind of Airbnb or a platform to put people into relation and be able to cross borders. Because the issue we have with vacant housing and homelessness is everywhere. And crossing borders is possible by scaling up and setting up just platform, just like Airbnb.
Yeah, excellent, good. So our third speaker is Emiliano from Mexico. He also run and actually started a startup about tourism. Now, tourism is now one of the most largest industries worldwide. It has a huge environmental impact, which we hear a lot about. It also has a huge social impact. In some cases, it might have helped to boost local economies. In many cases, I think it actually done almost the opposite, and even in a way flattened the world to lose its kind of sense of authenticity and real feel, actually going somewhere. So Emiliano is trying to do something about it, but I'll let you explain the problem first, and then we'll go to the solution, right? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Momo. Yeah, so I am Emiliano. I am from Mexico, and I think in this first part, I'm going to talk more about the problem that we are trying to solve in Rutopía. And for that, I would like to introduce you to Leti and Alejandra. They are two indigenous women. They live in a very, very small village in the mountains of Mexico, in the state of Oaxaca, which, by the way, is the state from the big sculptures that are on the streets, which I'm very happy to see. So they come from that state. And for many decades, the main economic activity in that place was to make charcoal and sell it in the markets of the nearby towns. And the men, that's what they did, and that's how they made some money. But like 10 years ago, they depleted this resource, and most men migrated to the United States. So it's a little village where most of the people are women or children. And they formed a group of women, and they tried to think, how can we develop in a sustainable way without harming the natural resources that we still have in our community? And they had two ideas. The first one was to plant agave plants, the plant that gives mezcal, and to sell that, and also to protect the soils in that way, and also to receive travelers that could pay something for staying in their community and seeing the work they do and having amazing experiences in clean waterfalls and in very nice forests. So they launched that, and the day of the opening, no one really arrived. And when I met Viviana and Ale and Leti, it had been 3 years since they started that project, and no one had ever come to their community so far. And that's a very critical thing, because this is not an isolated rare case. It is just one of at least 2,700 indigenous touristic initiatives that we have mapped that are failing just because no one is going. So in Mexico, there's 38 million travelers that come each year. France is actually one of the biggest countries that visits Mexico. And most of them are looking for authentic experiences. And at the same time, we have 5.4 million young indigenous people who are unemployed and are forced to migrate to the US or to bigger cities because they cannot find a job on their own hometowns. So most of the travelers that come to Mexico looking for adventure travel end up in places like this one, tourist traps, and most indigenous youths end up doing jobs like this one. So what is the problem here? Well, even though they have all the nature, the culture, the local talent, and even the infrastructure to host travelers, and even though, as well, they have received millions of dollars to develop very nice ecotouristic projects, they still don't thrive because they also need to sell. And for selling trips, it's not so easy. You have to have easy bookings, you have to have good customer service, and you have to be resilient to late payments, which means that most of the platforms out there don't pay you with weeks or months in advance. They pay you just in time or after the trip has already finished. So you have to have an economic possibility of covering the costs of the trip before getting paid. And that is a big barrier for indigenous communities that, in many cases, don't even have a real economic income in money terms. So that's why 75% of the indigenous communities are failing in developing these kind of projects. And this represents a $45 billion market opportunity that is being wasted. And that is what we do. We are solving this problem. It's Rutopía. And we are a platform that connects these indigenous touristic initiatives to travelers from around the world. Or in other words, we are empowering youth to become touristic entrepreneurs in their own hometowns. And I think I will leave it for now.
Okay, and we'll come back to that. But tell us, what is the meaning of Rutopía? How did you come up with the name?
Yeah, so it's actually routes and utopia. So it's like utopic routes or utopic travels.
Okay, nice. Okay. Yeah. Does anybody already wants to ask a question? If you do, feel free to join in. Okay, so yeah, go ahead. Do we have some mics here? I've sort of interrupted things with starting too early, right? But I think that would be good if we'll already have kind of the audience as part of it. Oh, okay, good. Thank you.
Bonjour, Michel Courcy,
I'm Michel Courcy from Afronews. My question is for the lady. You presented your platform. It's a beautiful initiative, and I congratulate you. And most of the platforms I see here are very good, too. Now, I have a question for your platform. What is the business model? Because it's nice to be able to assist people, but there is a time when there is a problem of money. So how do you fund that? And that's the problem of most startups.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think I would add to that question sort of to be more, let's go more into the sort of the innovation thing about the platform. Sort of how was it before and how is it now with trying to help homeless people through Stirrup, basically.
Okay. Je vais répondre à votre question.
I'm going to answer your question at the same time. Before Stirrup, well, today the associations help people who are homeless. The solutions are not always ideals in the home centers, for instance. They have to buy or rent buildings or hotels to provide a shelter to people. Today, the landlords well, they don't ask anything they just lend it free of charge. They lend they rent to the association. So those landlords, those owners can have a certain amount of money which they can withdraw from their taxes. So as the owners earn money, Stirrup will also earn money. We are a cost killer, and every time someone earns money, Stirrup will take a commission out of it. We invoice services for these landlords to have access to the solution. So they still earn money because they lend free of charge, but they can withdraw the taxes, the money from taxes. So it's a good economic model. Now, second innovation. Today, we are lucky because in France, and this is being done elsewhere, we have the social bonds. We are now developing a social agreement or pact. It's still the same principle of cost killer. We ask a certain amount of money for housing, for the number of nights in a hotel, because they get shelter free of charge thanks to Stirrup, and we have an agreement with the government, and we get money from that. So Stirrup is a sort of provider that is funded by the government. And this is also important for the business model, because if Stirrup has a 600 with a landlord, the social agreement makes it possible to get even more money.
Very impressive indeed. And basically, so what you're saying is that all those flats were standing empty. The owners had to pay the taxes because they're there. And basically, you're turning that asset that wasn't used into a solution in terms of the homeless people. Did I get it right? Or?
Oui, c'est tout à fait ça. C'est tout à fait ça.
That's exactly that. Today, there are various stages. Stirrup today are working with real estate professionals. They keep these these apartments vacant because to have a real estate transaction, they have to be empty because it's easier for sale. I work also with another real estate group, which is Sergic. They also lend apartments in service residences because they know they will have problems with the turnover of people. So they lend also apartments. They don't want the apartments to be empty, but it's a little bit making sure that the residences are full.
Fantastic. We'll go back to you later. Gili, let's come back to you and hear. I mean, the organization is called B-Hub, right? So lots of bees, very busy, trying to kind of do something. So actually, you've been working for about 2 years now, or even more?
So I was in the founding team. We exist for 3 years now.
3 years, wow.
3 years, yeah. Times. Yeah. So so it's called a Hackaveret, which is beehive in Hebrew, because we think our entrepreneurs are bees that are producing honey for our society. So we are actually we are powered by two of the main organizations dealing with the development of social services in Israel. One of them, as Momo mentioned, is part of the National Insurance of Israel. And actually, a lot of the national program for vulnerable population and the reducing of social gaps were originally nurtured in those organizations and scaled through the government. They are both strategic partners of the Israeli government. So at some point, they saw the emerging social entrepreneurship field, and I think they also understood they don't have all the knowledge, and they decided to open a Hackaveret as an open innovation platform for social entrepreneurs with innovative ideas and use their own abilities in order to help those enterprises reach scale. So, just a second. So today, Hackaveret, so imagine we call entrepreneurs that answer some of the most pressing major social challenges, such as strengthen the status of elderly people in society, or developing services for children, teenagers, or young people at risk, break the cycle of poverty through employment, and improve the lives of people with disabilities. Again, what we are interested in is reducing social gaps and go for equality. So let's see some of these major challenges. So we call entrepreneurs in those fields, and we want to help them scale up. So Hackaveret really wishes to be there for the entire life cycle of an enterprise, because when we looked at the field today, we saw that there are a lot of great programs, but most of them kind of touch a specific point in the process, and then a lot of great enterprises kind of like fall between chairs. So we really wanted to be there for all the stages, from at the education stage, where we expose people to the field of social entrepreneurship, which is the most initial stage, then through the sprouting, where we take existing entrepreneurs and we connect them to crucial social challenges for them to innovate new solutions, through the acceleration, where we take existing enterprises and we build a long-term program with them, and then all the way until they reach scale. So really, we're trying to be there for the entire life cycle, and I want us to zoom in at the accelerator program, which is our flagship program, just so you can get a sense of what we do. So imagine there's an enterprise and its initial stage that is trying to really boost towards scale, that is at that stage now. Now, they come for us for a really intensive 4 months program, 2 days a week, 2 full days, and we help them build a long-term program and work plan for their enterprises, and we help them design their proof of concept. We connect them to the best professionals in their field, and we also connect them to their target populations so they can test their enterprise. At the end of the day, we also fund some of these enterprises for their first large-scale pilot. So what we're really trying to do is help them fulfill their impact and take them to the next stage, because again, when we looked at this field of social entrepreneurship today, we saw that at the stage where enterprises have great work plans, but not a lot more than that, it's really hard for them to raise that initial money that is at risk to fulfill their impact. So in our theory of change, we said, okay, if we can do that for them and help them build the most professional work plan, but at the same time also help them gain experience, we will really increase their chance to scale. So that's what we're trying to do. This is just some of the numbers from our activity. So today we have 2,500 community members that are all social entrepreneurs, which makes us the biggest social entrepreneurship community in Israel. We held more than 25 meetups throughout the countries on the subject of social entrepreneurships for entrepreneurs or people who are interested in social entrepreneurship. We are now working on the first of its kind diversity program to encourage more social entrepreneurship in the Arab community in Israel. We have 31 enterprises that are graduates of our accelerator program, 14 of which received funding, and we are guiding them through their pilots. And we held 2 major hackathons with over 200 participants. So this is just our work in a glimpse. And I think we're going to talk about success stories after.
Yeah, we'll come back to success stories after, but I would like to ask you at that stage, I mean, again, what has changed in terms of social innovation if we look from the eyes of social security, for instance, or the government? They're always looking, I think, worldwide, looking for solutions to urging kind of social issues. So in those 3 years, can you already, I know that I'm asking you to sort of speak about your work here, but can you see a change of mindset in those decision makers and funders from the government in terms of how to solve social issues?
So I said our partner organizations, I think they really identified the emerging social entrepreneurship field in Israel, and they can no longer ignore it. And I think it's a huge thing that 2 of the main organizations that have all this experience and knowledge and capabilities to open their gates and say, we want to be there and help these enterprises scale their ventures and not only do what we do normally. Okay. I think it's a huge thing. And I also want to say that as a consequence of our activities, for instance, what we're trying to do is we're trying to reach ministries of the Israeli government for them to also see these enterprises and see how they can help them scale up and cooperate and make their enterprises into social services provided by the government. So one of the example is that we are now connected to the Ministry of Welfare in Israel, and after they saw our activities and they've met our entrepreneurs and they identified the potential of their innovative models, they actually started a new committee that is a governmental committee that I'm a part of, that its entire goal is to examine how social entrepreneurs can better connect to the government. And I'm really proud of that. Fantastic. Because, so we've been working for the past year with the Ministry of Welfare, and I think that says a lot about the potential that now the entire ecosystem is discovering about social entrepreneurship. So.
Fantastic. It reminds me of an example from a different field. We once hosted a colleague from India at a conference in Israel about innovation, and he was saying, he gave the example of the typical current way of thinking and a new way of thinking. And he said, let's think about water. The typical way of thinking about supplying communities with water is building a grid, a national grid. A national grid is always complicated. If you're in the context of India, that's what he was saying, it might even be more complicated because of various issues, and eventually people are without any water. If you'll change your mindset into thinking, okay, let's not work a grid and let's not build a grid. Let's try and think about solutions that everybody can put in their home and sort of have fresh water. All of a sudden, you have a completely different scenario of how to solve the problem of water, and it might be less complicated to achieve because you don't need that very complicated national grid that usually comes with water. So basically what you're saying is that the government is kind of trying to do something different. So we'll come back to you.
And also cooperation.
Yeah, that's a cooperation. Emiliano, we started about tourism, and you've kind of left us with the problem of sort of, opening up a fantastic new experience, but nobody comes. So hopefully with your help, people are coming, right? So let's go into that.
Can I have the clicker, please? No, thanks. Yes, so, there we go. So yeah, Rutopía is basically a platform, as I said, that connects these indigenous touristic projects with travelers from around the world. Now, I want to go a little bit on how we actually do it. Well, the first step is we set up something that we call Root hubs. And it's basically we create working groups in the form of cooperatives in each of these communities that in many cases they already exist because they do other economic activities within their communities. And then we do a co-design workshop in which we make sure that they have experiences that are integrated, that are unique, that are safe, and that are all-inclusive. Because these are 3 things that are basic to be in any of the online channels for tourism of the 21st century. Now, we take charge. Now, once this is all set, we take charge of all the selling, and that is essential for it to work. But there's many barriers for them to connect, for example, to Airbnb, to TripAdvisor, or to Viator, or all the other platforms that already exist, because they have to pay for our reservation software in most of the cases. They have to have customer service in 2 languages at least, and they have to have payment facilities. And this has very high fixed costs for very small initiatives. And usually this is the main barrier, because that's why they cannot access the market. So it is impossible for them. What we do is we offer all of this, and we turn these fixed costs into a variable commission that they only have to pay if they sell. And it's a variable fee for each of the reservations. Our business model is that we take a 20% commission directed to the traveler on top of the price that is established by the local group. Now, this is very important because we are changing the paradigm in which indigenous travel works, because usually in countries like Mexico, there is indigenous travel, but it's carried out by external tour operators that take groups of people and usually take up to 90% of the value. So we don't take tours to indigenous communities, but we empower communities so they can run their own tours. And this way, they're taking most of the value chain in this industry. And by just hosting 20 travelers per month, they can actually have a revenue of $3,000, which is far more of the other economic activities they have access right now, which is mainly palm oil plantations or cattle breeding, which are also highly extractive industries. Right now, we already work with 12 indigenous communities, and we are providing jobs to 140 people. And it is a very important moment for Rutopía, because after 3 years of working with this, we finally got the funding to actually scale it from the Bill Clinton Foundation. So we are very excited, because with this funding and with the help of the Mexican government, we are going to activate 250 communities in the next year. And our long-term plans is to work also in South American and Central American countries. Actually, last month we opened our first community in Colombia. So that's like our pilot there, and it's working pretty well. And another thing is that we realized that if we actually want to scale, we have to partner up with the ones who are already the leaders in the experiential travel industry. So 2 months ago, we actually signed a contract with Airbnb in which they will offer the experiences of Rutopía for their corporate responsibility programs without commission. And that's perfect, because then we have a value chain that it's more towards the provider, the final provider. And yes, so I just want to end up talking a little bit more about the impact, because it's important to see that when these communities and these young people in the communities are gaining an economic income and recognition for keeping their nature and their culture alive, there is a reinvestment to protect this. And this eventually generates a regeneration of the ecosystems and the social tissues. And that is the true impact of what we do, and it's the reason why we do it. And the question today is not if this kind of biocultural travel is possible or not, because the market need is there. People want to travel like that. The communities are ready. They have everything they need. And we have a method to turn this whole opportunity into a huge social business. So the question today really is, who wants to come to Mexico and have a biocultural
Fantastic. I'm signing, but you need to tell us how many visitors are there so far to that village that you've started with, the one that, you know, nobody showed up. So I guess that it is sort of building up now?
Yeah, in that specific community, I think they are right now almost hitting the 200 visitors.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
That's very important. Well done. And I think, again, what's unique here is that you kind of work with both sides. You need to gain trust of both sides, both in terms of the large sort of, you know, Airbnb, TripAdvisor, all those mega global corporations nowadays that sort of, in a way, without us always completely understanding it, are kind of moving the global tourism sort of movement. And at the same time, you're working with those local communities, allowing them to keep their own identity, but at the same time open up and sort of offer a completely different, I think, experience that a lot I would imagine that a lot of us sitting here today are kind of looking for, right? You were kind of saying this is not the Hawaiian shirt kind of typical tourist who comes off the bus, instead of being shown what the typical, tourist would see, but somebody who's looking for something much more unique and authentic and interesting, right?
Yeah, right. We call it biocultural travel.
Biocultural travel?
Biocultural travel. And the very essence is that it has to be regenerative. So when we do our co-design workshops, we make sure that all the inputs are local. And there's 4 dimensions in which we focus to make sure it's like a Rutopía trip. The first one is the body dimension. There has to be some physical activity, going to the forest, swimming in waterfalls, swimming in cenotes. There is the mind, which is you have to learn something from the community in your trip. So mostly there's classes from the local indigenous language, handcrafts classes. And the third one, it's the emotional part. Okay. There's always a connection. It's not just a client and a host. It's more, it's a guide that becomes your friend, and you have dinners with the families, and it's a very, very horizontal relationship. It's very important to say it's not volunteering. You're not gonna go and help them out in anything. You're just buying a service from them because you value what they have. And that's the cool part about it.
Very impressive. If anybody is thinking still about their commitments, I think that you can sort of have some kind of options over here at Rutopía and commit. And I think we can all adopt, again, the body, learning and emotion, right? That's the movement, learning and emotion. Fantastic. Question, comments? Yeah, go ahead. There's 1, 2. So again, Delia, if somebody could help with the mic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm afraid I'm going to do it in French.
Absolutely. So feel free to do it in French.
I think it will be easier for me. But I would like to thank the 4 of you, because it's quite fascinating to hear about this entrepreneurship and see how this can develop. You started the conference talking about 3 major crises: climate change, inequality, trust. Well, I think this is to be seen in the light of Felix Cataria's books on the 3 ecologies. First, environment, nature. Second, social ecology. We are in the middle of it, and there is a third ecology, which is mental ecology, which seems to be hardly addressed by the world of enterprises, sometimes too much addressed by the political circles. And today I'm quite concerned and I'm interested in the distribution of models to better understand mental ecology. My question is, do you know enterprises or entrepreneurs or startups who are working in that field of mental ecology? Of course, I will react to the word trust, which you have used. If you know some of them, can you give examples? And is it a relevant subject for you? Because if we save the economy, if we save the environment, the person who is living in all this, is he or she doing exactly what he or she should?
Thank you. Let's take the second question and combine them together, and I'll come back to you maybe for more clarification. So let's hear the second. Thank you. And feel free to ask in French. I'm sorry that I can't follow.
Hi. My question is directly for Emiliano. I just want to know if you're a traveler and you want to purchase a travel with you, should I just have to accommodate myself to the things you are offering? And do you have like packages? And how long is the shortest package you have? Because that, like the way you say, you have to go to learn, to buy, to experience. So I believe it's you, the one that is choosing, not the traveler, the experience, you know?
And what do you think, by the way, I mean, it's a very good question. What do you think would be a reasonable, length of time?
I'll say 1 week is
1 week, okay.
Enough, more than enough.
Okay.
And I believe if there's any way like to know 2 or 3 different communities in Mexico at the same moment I'm doing my trip, Like, you know, if I'm crossing the Atlantic to go to Mexico, I don't want to just stop in one city, in one village. I want to go in different ones and probably learning more stuff. I don't know if you already have this package in your...
Okay, so let's start with that question, Emiliano. What's, is a week reasonable? Could it be done in a week or even less?
Yeah, it could be done in a week for sure. Thanks for asking that. It gives me to talk about how do we actually do it on practice. Yes, so I agree with you that we are choosing in some ways the packages, because when you go to Rutopía.com, you can choose from the 12 communities and many different packages. But the good thing, to answer your question, is, yeah, you can also find routes, different routes that cover different areas of Mexico. So I think the main challenge we have right now to develop that in a further way is that when we are talking about routes, we usually only give the specific details on how to move from one place to another. So that's very focused for backpackers. And when people that are not necessarily backpackers, but they want more traditional tours, when you go to one place and another, the fixed cost of having that is very high. So we have to do it for large groups. So that's kind of the challenge we have right now. But for sure, if you're like in a backpacker way, you can do up to, we have actually a girl from France that stayed for 1 month just in 3 communities in the southeast of Mexico. So it's perfectly feasible.
Yeah, and it seems that there definitely need maybe to be a change in the way that we see tourism, and I think it also connects in a way to the environmental problem of flying from one end of the world to another and very quickly, but at the same time very pollution-wise in terms of carbon. Let's go back to the first question, which I think is very challenging. Any thoughts from any of you? Or do we need some more clarifications in terms of the question? More clarifications? So could we ask you to take back the mic, please? Maybe it was lost in translation, by the way. When it was translated, the mental health. It's mental health issues. That was the question. No. So that's what I think exactly.
I would call it l'écologie de l'esprit, c'est-à-dire que on a eu ce matin.
We had this morning with Bertrand Piccard. We had examples, very inspiring examples of ecology of the environment. So a strong approach with 1,000 projects. This afternoon we have very inspiring examples, very successful examples of social ecology, where we recreate links and create business value by creating social links. But there is a third ecology, which is that of trust, which is called the spirit or spiritual ecology, the one that provokes because it is malfunctioning, like the increase of populism. And if they produce what they've been producing for some years now, in a repetitive way, where we risk losing the benefits of the other types of ecology. So my question is, do you know entrepreneurs or companies that invest in this field, the field of trust?
I think that, yeah, that's a very, very important question. Does anybody know? I mean, the immediate response is, there are some startups, I think, in Israel that try to work against fake news and try to give you better information about things that you come across with. But I don't think that they would really answer the question, which is really a mega important one in terms of populism and the way that it seems as if we can't really completely sometimes understand the meaning behind what we see, and whether somebody is trying to, maneuver us to a certain position. Let's keep it open, and we'll open up, I think, to some maybe thoughts from the audience as well. And I'll think if I come up with some answers as well. I do think that one of maybe the answers to that, which is not a complete answer, but I think it might be one of the, let's say, directions to tackle that problem, is to maybe in some cases to think about less centralized models. if we keep on going back to that example that I gave about the water grid, that we need the national water grid, that somebody needs to build that water grid. Now, but somebody needs huge funding to build that water grid. Somebody needs a huge corporation to take care of that water grid, etc., etc. And all those sort of ways of work lead to all kinds of manipulations about where the funding go and where the people are employed. And you know, the problem that you mentioned, if we manage to come with an innovation that maybe breaks up that huge water grid into small actions that each and everyone can do, in that regard, we take back control ourselves, and we still get what we need, which is fresh water, but maybe it is less sort of susceptible to all the problems of corruption and manipulation, etc. But that's just maybe an opening to the answer. And again, I invite you all to think about it and have some comments as well. I want to continue and then, okay, let's take your question as well, and then we'll go on.
Bonjour, Anne-Léon.
My name is Anne-Léon. This is not a question, but a reaction to the so-called spiritual mental ecology. It seems to me that this could be what we call personal development. So this approach through which each of us can realize that he or she is the initiator of all the changes that will happen around him or her. So as a life coach, there is a political issue. So how can you bring personal development to a wider system without being a cult? So this is actually a true question. So this is the question of startups for so-called mental or spiritual ecology.
Absolutely. Good. Another, okay, go ahead.
Okay, I have a question for Emiliano and maybe a quick reaction, but you asked for examples about the mental ecology and the trust issues, for interpersonal issues also. And do not mean to hijack the meeting, but maybe we can talk later about what I'm doing.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
by the way, I think that's what the purpose here is.
I'm working on enhancing social bonds by allowing people to lend freely sports equipment today, but to each other for free. And the for free is very important for the trust issues. Anyway, Emiliano, I was just wondering, do you already start to tackle the question of, okay, if I take one guy from France going to Mexico and back in a plane, it's about 1 year of heating in energy spending. So what you're doing is very positive, don't get me wrong, but have you already thought about how can we compensate that and how can we inspire that, also in other places or closer places to people from Europe, for example?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think that's very important. I'm actually an environmental engineer, and the project started a little bit in that sense of how can we offset the carbon footprints of the travelers whenever they do a trip, because our main hypothesis is that travel is still going to be there. What we're trying to do is, if they come to these destinations, they are actually having a positive impact overall in the CO2 footprint, because with each community they visit, we make sure we have different mechanisms, but I'm going to give you one example for 3 communities that we work with in Chiapas. So each of these touristic projects, if you want to become a shareholder of this project, you have to say how many of the jungle that is around there is yours, and you are committing to preserve it in order to benefit from the little touristic initiative that is there. In those cases are very high-level touristic initiatives like 4-star hotels that were funded by the government, and the commitment is that they have to protect their jungle in order to benefit from that. And that is how we assure that it's actually regenerative in the short term. In other cases, for example, in the Oaxaca example I was saying before, in that case, like 30% of the income that they make, they give it directly to the recovery of soils through the agave plantations. So what I'm going here is that in each of the new destinations that we activate, we are always taking care that it has actually a positive impact, and in the long term what we want to measure is, okay, is this actually having a more than neutral impact, or it is staying in neutral? And another very important thing is that we are aiming for quality over quantity. So if one specific destination is starting to get more demand, we're not just going to open it for 100 or 200 people coming, but we're going to start making more premium experiences in which the price is higher, and then the footprint stays the same, but the regeneration increases.
I would definitely add to that I think that in a way it asks for a more conscious sort of traveler. So I guess that person to begin with would sort of, would think more about whether this travel really is sort of, is it worth it? Maybe he or she will try and offset, and maybe those persons will also, say, okay, if I want to lie on a beach, maybe I'll take a short train ride. If I really make it all the way to Mexico, I will do something meaningful that's sort of helping a community, et cetera, et cetera. But still, that's the interconnectedity that we sort of see all around. Before I take another answer, I do want to come back to you, Delphine, and connect things. When you work about, again, when we talk things over, you said something that maybe Stirrup eventually could also help with the immigration issue as well. And that's something that also connects, I think, to the mental ecology. That's definitely an issue that's dividing countries all over Europe, and the States at the moment rises a lot of sort of space, unfortunately, for populism and etc. So let's take Stirrup as an example. Fast forward, I don't know, 10 years, when Stirrup is a mega global corporation, and how is it sort of helping in that sense?
Okay, effectivement, Stirrup pourrait...
Well, actually, Stirrup, yes, could hope that we'll have no homelessness in France. We'll have gone through housing first. And yes, Stirrup could address this issue, since the fact that you can mobilize housing, vacant housing, quickly and nearly for free on territories could address the issue of immigration. The first example show it, because we meet in an emergency people coming to France who are refugees, coming directly from refugee camps in war zones, and it could also address issues when you have natural catastrophes, where people have to move quickly, where it is a constraint, where it is not secure to build camps, refugee camps, or climate refugees or war refugees. Yes, it is a solution to meet these, to address these issues everywhere in the world. We could do it today in France, in Europe, and it helps find a sustainable solution. We're thinking about startups working on the mental ecology, but it is exactly that. What Stirrup provides is a roof. Now, housing is the basis to work on the whole aspect. Is pretty in line with your question. Someone who spends a whole day because of natural catastrophe or an accident or a mental or psychological problem, spends his whole day trying to find food or shelter. Even if he's got work or if he's studying, is going to be blocked in all this development, personal development. And therefore, I hope that within 10 years, Stirrup could be an answer. Not an instant, but at least nearly an instant reflex to shelter people massively, safely for transitory time.
I think that's definitely something that we all need and will build trust. Gili, before we take the next question, give us sort of some more examples of sort of new startups that come up with solutions to social sort of issues. We have homeless, we have, let's say, eco, kind of natural tourism, and we've heard some more. So, but give us some more sort of, I think, examples about maybe the the mega social issues that you've mentioned when you started.
So I will tell you the story of Israel. I always tell the story of the entrepreneurs as well, because I think they're a success story as much as the enterprise itself. So when we opened the first call for proposals for the first cohort of our accelerator program, we did kind of a roadshow in Israel just to tell and expose entrepreneurs to our program. And at the end of one of the events, someone came up to me and he told me, hi, my name is Israel, I'm 57 years old. That's exactly what he said. I'm 57 years old. I'm an autodidact. I've never studied in a formal framework. I've also never called myself a social entrepreneur, but I have this idea. I've been working on this VR environments that I think that can really improve the lives of people with mental disabilities. And I wanted to ask you if you think the program suits me. And I told him, listen, apply and we'll see. And he applied, and he was chosen to be among one of the 16 enterprises that were accepted to the cohort among more than 200 that applied. And for 4 months, we've been working closely with him. He had a mentor that is one of the best professionals for people with mental health, and another mentor that is a known entrepreneur that did his exit, also with a technological venture for people with disabilities. And at the end of the 4 months, he wrote a great work plan, and he just needed money. He designed VR environments that were meant to be implemented in the treatments of people with mental disabilities in order to integrate them better into the community and help them practice daily routines, how to arrange yourself to go to work, how to take the bus. Really things that are ordinary for us, but needed practice from people that were institutionalized. And today the method is to go and do that with them. They have volunteers, they go, they take the bus ride with them, they write reports, and that's how they treat them. And he said, you know what, let's try and use VR, and then we can summon the triggers that they really need to work on, and then we can do the same situation, exact same situation, all over again every week, and see the improvement and see how the person is behaving in the same situation in different time frames. So as I said, he had a great work plan, but he didn't have the money to start and developing the VR environments. So he handed out a proposal for a large-scale pilot, and we gave him a grant of 50,000 euros. And we were also able to connect him through our mentors to the Ministry of Health. And he was connected to the largest NGO dealing with people with mental disabilities. And he trained their professionals on how to use the VR environment that he developed. And he was working with 30 patients. And when he finished, it was about 2 months ago, 3 of the major hospitals in Israel for mental health have been wanting to work with him, and today he works with them, all 3 of them, because of the experience that he gained throughout his pilot. And I think it's a great, and he also is already looking on how to expand internationally. So I think it's a success story, first of all, because of Israel. And I remember the insecure person that came up to me at the end of the event and didn't even know to call himself a social entrepreneur. And today he goes on global stages and talks about his model, and people are chasing him to implement his VR technology. But also because of the enterprise that I think is a true game changer in the way we treat people with mental disabilities. And when we help and scale such enterprise, it creates such larger change. This is exactly what we wish to gain. And
how many of those 30 participants that used the virtual reality what was the change?
So we witnessed improvement of more than 30% in at least half of the patients, which is in their terms is pretty huge.
In a much more cost-effective way,
exactly,
I guess, right?
Exactly.
Because you don't have to have those volunteers and day-to-day, and you can't measure the change.
And it's much more effective, exactly.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Good, we'll come back for more examples, but we have a question here waiting very patiently, so thank you for that. Any other questions, by the way, to move the mic to afterwards? Okay, there's one here, so we'll pass it behind. Good, go ahead.
Thank you. Ana Maria Estevez from Community Insights Group, a consultancy. My question is about dinero. So,
sorry?
Money.
Ah, okay. Okay.
And it's a question for...
Yeah, okay, for Emiliano, yeah.
For Emiliano, but also Delphine. Do your organizations, have you had outside investors? And what has that mean for any changes that you have made to your business model as a result? So my question's around the impact of impact investment on both of your models.
Excellent. Great question. So let's if you could give the mic to Rose back. Good.
Hi, my name is Beatrice. I wanted to ask about the Israel environment. I've had the opportunity to heard about the digital in Tel Aviv, how the data kind of thing, it's very innovative, the government. And I think what you said about the connection with government, and I wanted to ask, in your opinion, both of you, how do you describe the best key aspects to the social entrepreneurship to rise and to flourish? Because I think I wanted to hear your opinion.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. Here's a, you know what, let's quickly have some answers and then the lady over there, we'll get back to you. Okay, so Delphine, Emiliano, who wants to start? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so yes, in our case, very luckily our impact investors have been very aligned to our mission. The first seed capital we got, it was from Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and it was a grant, so obviously it did have a lot of impact in the positive sense that they helped us refine our circular economy model. And then 1 month ago, we just sold 20% of the company to the Holt Price Foundation and the Clinton Foundation. And that's also very lucky because unlike most of impact investors, they don't have any vote on the way we run our company. It's almost
do whatever you like and waste your money and on parties and alcohol and everything and simply do that, right?
Yes, almost. No, we have to find milestones, but they don't decide on which, because our metrics are obviously impact. We all measure social return on investment and we are not very profit-minded in some sense. So most investors, even impact investors, will be very worried about the decisions you make in terms of profitability. So far, it's been great for us because they let us use impact as our main metric. But I know of many of the social enterprises in Mexico that we know as soon as they get impact investment, their whole decision-taking shifts a little bit to the more profit side. So, yes.
Good. Delphine, do you want to add some?
Oui. Alors pour moi, la question se pose.
For me, the question is raised because it is the beginning of the startup. With the impact, social impact, like social bonds, the impact is worth it because the people who invest into Stirrup via this contract, it's not so much in fact it's debt that finance development of Stirrup are fully interested and aligned with the fact that you need to have impact. You have to maximize impact to have a better return on investment. So it was the first part of my answer. So it will not go against the culture of the startup because it's actually motivation and the impact for these investors. And second, the more classic investors in the startup, there is a risk of investors want to have an influence and change the model, the culture for added profitability. This is a question that is actually raised today because I'm going to levy some funds. So I don't have a return on experience. Maybe we can talk about it next year, but I choose the investors I work with. Today, to finance startups, whether they're social impact startups or more classic startups, technology startups, money is not a problem. Money is there. When you have a project that you can defend with the right development indicators or the social impact, we can afford to choose investors, and this is the phase I'm in to select the investors properly.
And I think that the interesting thing is that both of you are for-profits and not non-for-profits, which we see a lot of impact investment basically. I would say, at least in my experience, they're sort of shying away from for-profit because they're saying, no, that's business. So I think it's a good example. Gili, let's talk a little bit about the Israeli innovation scene. The second question that we heard, what can you say about that?
I would say there are two layers of my answer. The first one is the people. I think the mentality in general, it's a generalization, but I think the mentality is that people are very proactive. First of all, there are a lot of social challenges, unfortunately, but I think in general people are very proactive. People, there are a lot of them that are activists, and I think that's, you know, the more cultural aspect of it. But at the same time, I have to say the second layer is the institutions. And I think the government and the governmental entities really encourage that, and that's also a game changer. For instance, Israel has an entity that is called the Israeli Authority for Innovation Authority.
Yeah, Innovation Authority.
The Innovation Authority that gives grants for R&D for startups in really high amounts. I think 90% of the social enterprise I know received grants for R&D from the Israel Innovation Authority, which is huge, and they are there for the startups. They have now a department that is called the Social Arena of the Israel Innovation Authority that is focused at technological startups for impact technological startups. So not only do they give grants for R&D and help entrepreneurs in this initial stage, they have a whole department that is focused on impact startups, and it's a governmental, it goes from our tax money. I think it's huge. So both of these two layers, I think, really are at the base of the ecosystem.
Yeah, and I would add to that another aspect of the work of the Innovation Authority is basically working alongside with large Israeli corporations. So they kind of do a partnership. One of my favorite stories is in food tech. They have a partnership between a major Israeli global, basically food corporation, and the Israeli Innovation Authority. They started a food tech hub. The company has the first, could make the first offer for the startups, but it's not as if the startups have to work with that company. So what you get eventually is all the entrepreneurs that come to the startup has the access to all the knowledge that there is at a mega food company, but still have their independence to choose between any offer that they want. But definitely the food company would make a lot of effort to make sure that all those entrepreneurs are very happy, that they feel good with that corporation, etc., etc. And it builds a community, and I think that's the most important essence of that. And it sort of, as Gili mentioned, it also trickles down to the government, because when the government sort of officials see that cooperation between sort of the Innovation Authority and corporations, they kind of say, why don't we do something similar? And that's how the social sort of security comes up and says, okay, I want to have an innovation hub myself as well. Okay, we have a commitment for the last question, I think, which is over there. Go ahead.
Hello, hi, my question is for Delphine. I wanted to know what is the exactly is the stages involved in setting up Stirrup, and what are the resources used in setting up?
Okay.
Can you repeat the end of the question, please?
What are the stages involved in setting up Stirrup, and what are the resources used?
The resources, en français, pardon.
The resources we use for stirrups, that's easy. We have the platform, as we said, and then we have worked a lot with the Alliance Network, which organizes the forum, to distribute the responsibilities between Stirrup, the partners, the customers, the clients, and all the partners with the so-called cooperation agreements. And in terms of resources, Stirrup is very much based on the resources of the partners. Today, Stirrup will provide a relationship between these parties, and will try to spot the people who need dwellings, and also the delivery of the keys. And then Stirrup will use all the resources as we do for vacant dwellings. We have people who are good in these professions, so Stirrup has no specialist internally, but they will use the services of those people. The resources are not huge compared with the social impact, because we distribute the responsibilities and the task. I forgot the first part of it. What was the first part of it, Momo? Do you remember the first part of the question, please?
Les
stages.
Les étapes, pardon.
Okay.
Oui, c'est ça.
Yeah, that's right, the stages. Well, we have now finished part of the experiments. I am in mode crash test, because we are developing a prototype, and we now have a process which is professional. The whole contractual structure is digital. Everything is digital now. Stirrup is local today. I am now discussing with the government to be able to go further and faster to meet some challenges, such as sheltering or shelters for women who have problems at home or who are beaten. That's what I meant when I said I'm going to try to find new resources, because we will need human resources to make things possible, to meet various associations on the territories on which we will work. So now we will go beyond the region and the borders of the region. Now the ambition is to provide shelter to 300 people. I have 300 dwellings, and then have 3,000 dwellings in the 3 years to come on the French territory.
And again, another option for commitment. So I think we're wrapping up. I think we had a very good discussion, and I was very happy with all your questions. And I think we all would like to thank you for that. I would say, to wrap up, that I think that some of you must have followed that the recent awardees of the Nobel Prize for Economy are researchers that work on poverty. One of them, I think, is two of them are actually French, I think, right? And if I understood correctly, there are two messages here. One, obviously, is the power of the economy to solve, I think, social issues. And in a way, it's an interesting. We've been, I think, very well trained to expect government to solve social issues, and maybe civil society, but here is a statement saying we expect the economy to also help solve social issues as well. The second message, which I think is very interesting, is the fact that they came up with a questionnaire that manages to get much more correct and relevant answers from people suffering from poverty than the usual questionnaires that usually came up. I started as a social worker, community organizer, and I know how difficult it is to really understand the problem, and especially the problem around poverty. So again, basically, in a very, what seems is a very elegant way, trying to disrupt a lot of the work around trying to solve poverty. And I think that's the essence of that. And I think what we heard here today is, again, in a very creative, in a very mature kind of way, and very unintimidating, very unthreatening, I think, way, ways to solve very aggressive, problematic social issues. So thank you very much, and hopefully it also kind of inspired you to think about your commitment in terms of what would you like to commit And we all, again, invite you to log on online and raise your commitment. So thank you very much, and please join me in thanking the speakers. And enjoy the evening and afternoon. See you tomorrow, right? Any other message? That's it, right? See you tomorrow all. Thank you.